On a dismal morning in a small rural hamlet in Maine, an illustrator named David investigates the aftermath of a rare rainstorm that occurred the night before. An old tree had broken through their window, and his son, Billy, called David and his wife Steph to report that the lake house had also been demolished. David notices that a tree from their neighbor's yard has fallen onto the lake house. The family notices a significant amount of mist streaming down from the mountain, which David finds weird even after a strong downpour. David then chooses to go over to his neighbor's yard to discuss the fallen tree, but Steph urges him to be cautious, citing David and their neighbor's previous property dispute. David meets Norton, who is struggling to get his chainsaw to operate. David informs Norton and discovers that Norton's automobile has also been damaged. Norton then asks David for a favor, asking him to go to town and get repair materials. David accepts, believing it will improve relations with Norton. Norton, David, and Billy travel into town, encountering repair vehicles in a convoy with the soldiers. Norton identifies them as members of a local military base working on Project Arrowhead. Norton inquires whether David is aware of the project, to which David responds that speculations vary from crashed alien spacecraft to magical animals. They enter the store, and David speaks with store clerks Sally and Ollie, who are busy serving several clients. Norton praises David, and Billy inquires whether he and Norton have reconciled. David claims it is too early to tell, although they are currently civil. A gang of soldiers enters the store, eager to leave town for a little vacation. One of them, Jessup, smiles at Sally before welcoming an elderly woman, Mrs. Repler. Mrs. Repler greets Billy and asks how he handled the thunderstorm before going on about the storm and how it wrecked a large chunk of the town. As Mrs. Repler speaks, David notices a woman named Amanda who gives him a flirtatious glance. Norton spots a military police officer entering the store and speaking with Jessup's group. Sirens are heard as police and firefighters hurry throughout town. The military police officer then tells Jessup to cancel their vacation and return to the post as soon as possible. When the military base's sirens sound, everyone in the store comes to a stop. Dan, a man with a bloodied nose, rushes into the store, saying that there are creatures in the mist that have taken one of his companions. Ollie attempts to calm him down, but he tears and orders them to lock the store doors. One of the shoppers rushes out to his car, but the mist creeps in and covers everything. They only hear weak screams from the man. When tremors shake the store, everyone stares silently out the window, seeing nothing but white. Bud, the store manager, orders everyone to stay inside, but a woman insists on leaving to see her children. Mrs. Carmody, a religious freak, believes the fog represents death and is a herald of the apocalypse. David subsequently meets Mrs. Repler, who introduces him to Amanda, who is new in town. He caters to Billy and keeps him comfortable. Ollie, the store clerk, informs David that he may locate blankets in the loading dock. As David approaches the loading dock, he notices that the store generator has become jammed. He navigates in the darkness, and he hears rattling from the store's roll-up doors. The banging becomes louder, and David rushes back into the store, terrified. He meets Ollie and a few others who are on their way to check the generators. David informs them about the noise, and they all enter to investigate. Jim, one of the men, gives them flashlights, and Norm, another store employee, joins them. They discover something is obstructing the generator's exhaust, and Norm intends to unblock it from the outside. David opposes, claiming that they don't know what's in the mist, but Jim and Norm insist on proceeding, claiming that they don't appreciate David talking down to them simply because he's a great illustrator. David defends himself, stating he's merely concerned about everyone's safety, but Jim becomes enraged and threatens David. The roll-up doors open, and Norm prepares to exit. The thick mist sweeps in, and they all make fun of David for being terrified of it. Suddenly, a giant tentacle emerges from the fog, wrapping around Norm's foot and tugging him out. David dives in to aid Norm, while the rest of the men remain frozen in dread. More tentacles appear as Ollie runs to get an axe. The tentacles open, revealing claws and injuring Norm, ripping chunks of flesh out. Ollie prepares to slice off the tentacle, but it drags Norm away, causing Ollie to miss. Norm continues to grasp on, and David and Ollie attempt to pull him back. Jim and the other man are stunned, helpless to aid as more tentacles wriggle in. Ollie and David are forced to let go of Norm or risk being sucked out as well. Norm vanishes into the mist, screaming. Ollie runs to seal the doors, while David fights off the tentacles. He grabs the axe and slashes away at one of the larger tentacles, chopping off the tip as the door closes. David then strikes Jim and blames him for Norm's death. Ollie separates the two men, and David continues to chastise Jim for not helping. They reunite inside the store and discuss how they will inform everyone. David starts by telling Norton, but he doesn't believe them. David then encourages Norton to check the loading dock for the tentacle in Norm's blood, but Norton becomes angry, believing the group would beat him up in retaliation for suing David. The rest of the customers in the store hear the ruckus, and David describes their experience. Surprisingly, no one believes them. David then shows them the blood-stained cargo dock and the detached tentacle. Bud returns to affirm to everyone that what David said is correct. Some of the shoppers assist in barricading the windows, but Norton remains skeptical, believing the scenario in the loading dock to be a staged incident. He tries to persuade some of the shoppers to accompany him, but Mrs. Commodi informs everyone that what is happening to them has been foretold in the Bible and is God's will. She continues to chat until she becomes the center of attention in the store, at which point she resorts to scaring youngsters. She then proclaims that the mist requires a blood sacrifice. Ollie tries to defuse the situation by threatening Mrs. Carmody if she continues to scare the people. Billy overhears the soldiers talking about something, but David takes him away. Billy is worried, thinking about his mother, but David reassures him that they will return to her. David meets with the rest of the people, who are arming themselves. Others advise creating torches. Amanda discloses that she has a gun with her and hands it to Ollie, who has plenty of shooting expertise. Norton and a small group decide to go out, which causes a commotion. David tries to talk them out of leaving, but Norton believes that leaving the store is the best option because there is nothing harmful in the mist. David instructs one of the men to go out with a rope attached around their waist and get a shotgun from one of the shoppers' cars. A biker volunteers and joins Norton's group. David holds the rope connected to the biker's waist until it begins to pull. It takes 3 men to draw the rope back, and once they do, only the biker's bottom half appears. Myron and Jim hook up lights and connect them to batteries. In the event of an emergency, the lights would illuminate the store. Later, a gigantic winged creature appears in the storefront window. Soon, more of the monsters come, and David understands the lights are drawing them. More massive animals come and begin hunting the giant insects. Jim and Myron race to turn on the lights, inadvertently worsening the situation. The shop window shatters and the animals rush into the store. David tries to fend off the vermin by lighting a mop and using it as a makeshift torch. Chaos erupts as more creatures enter, injuring and killing some of the people. Fire breaks out in the store, and David and the others manage to kill numerous creatures by setting them on fire, while Ollie kills one of the beasts, saving Billy. They manage to plug the window hole, and things settle down for a while. According to one witness, Mrs. Carmody's prediction that animals will attack them at night came true. David goes around checking on everyone, and another man appears to have been fatally hurt. Amanda notices that another individual has drunk a whole bottle of sleeping tablets. David gathers with some of the survivors and discusses the prospect of leaving, claiming that the store is not safe enough. David intends to go to the pharmacy next door to get supplies for the injured before taking his car and traveling as far as they can. Some of the survivors agree with him, but Amanda is concerned that the mist may cover a greater distance than they anticipate. David recognizes this, but he is also afraid that Mrs. Carmody's religious rantings are gradually gaining a following, and that the scenario may exacerbate the group's paranoia. Carmody keeps talking about how the mist wants sacrifice, and he's worried the rest of the survivors will believe her. Amanda claims that everyone in the store is civilized and would never descend to barbaric behavior, but Dan reminds out that fearful people become desperate in situations like these. A few hours later, David and a group decide to go to the pharmacy. Billy sobs, fearing he may lose his father, but David pledges to return. Carmody then stands in their way, warning them that going to the pharmacy will lead the animals back, bringing God's vengeance with them. Private Jessup joins the group, leaving his other soldiers behind in the store. They venture into the mist and make it safely to the pharmacy. They hunt through the aisles for supplies, eventually finding enough medicine for the wounded. They then see webs in the ceiling and discover people wrapped in webbed cocoons attached to the ceiling. Jim is abruptly grabbed by one of the cocoon people, who turns out to be the military police officer. He starts apologizing, claiming it was their fault. He suddenly begins convulsing, and his eyes turn white. Jim then stumbles across one of the creatures, a big spider, which Ollie shoots, but additional creatures approach and begin spewing acid webs. One man's leg is surrounded with acidic webs, and his skin melts off. The military police officer then falls to the ground and bursts open, letting hundreds of spiders out. The group is overtaken, so they flee to the grocery. Unfortunately, several members of the group are left behind. They arrive at the supermarket, all shouting and afraid. David rushes to Billy and grabs him tightly. The next day, David wakes up to Carmody preaching to a big number of survivors who are attentively listening. Ollie claims Carmody has become highly convincing, with the group seeing her like a prophet, believing what she says will come true. Jim is fully engaged in the sermon. David's gang has still opted to leave. He decides to speak with the soldiers, recalling the military police officer back at the pharmacy who apologized and said it was their responsibility. They find Jessup and ask him about the mist. Jessup claims he knows nothing, and the gang realizes that the other 2 troops are vanished. The party decides to search for the soldiers on a loading dock when Jim spots them. They learn that the soldiers have hung themselves. Jessup believes the soldiers hung themselves after he informed them what the military police officer had stated. Jim notices this and brings Jessup out in front of the gathering, telling them he has heard proof that the mist is the military's fault as a result of Project Arrowhead. Jessup reveals he heard reports of the military experimenting with an interdimensional portal, and Carmody begins repeating how Project Arrowhead has brought God's wrath, accusing Jessup of blasphemy. The crowd starts punching Jessup, and one of the men begins stabbing him. Carmody then orders that Jessup be fed to the monsters in the mist, and the audience cheers and shouts as they carry him out. Jessup begs to be allowed back in, but Jim keeps him out. Within seconds, a giant crab-like thing arrives and takes Jessup away. That night, David consoles Billy, saying he will never abandon him again. Billy asks David to protect him from the monsters, and David vows that he will never allow the monsters get to him. The next day, Dawn arrives and the group prepares to go, but Carmody is waiting for them by the door. She accuses them of blasphemy for disobeying her and calls them sinners. She then informs everyone that David's group should be sacrificed to the mist, and she commands her supporters to offer Billy as their first sacrifice. David's squad is swarmed, and they attempt to fight back while Carmody shouts, commanding her followers to kill them. Ollie then steps outside and shoots Carmody. Carmody's followers begin to pull away, allowing David's group to go. The party enters the front entrance and begins sprinting through the mist to find David's car. Ollie arrives at the car first, but is taken by the gigantic crab. The gigantic spiders pluck out the rest of the group one by one, separating them. David, Billy, Mrs. Repler, and Dan make it to the automobile, but the others are not as fortunate. David sees Ollie's rifle and steals it before starting the car. They pass by the storefront windows, while the remainder of the survivors watch them drive away. They travel to David's residence, where he discovers his wife wrapped in a web cocoon. He cries, but decides to keep driving for Billy's sake. They drove as far as they could, witnessing death and ruin everywhere. A massive giant covered in tentacles passes them, rattling the automobile with each stride. They keep going till they run out of gas and the automobile comes to a stop. David glances around at the despondent and dejected passengers in the car and can see they're all thinking the same thing. He takes the gun and discovers that it has 4 bullets left, enough for 5 passengers. David would be the odd one out. He begins loading the rifle and shoots 4 shots in rapid succession. David yells in pain before stepping out into the mist. He yells and stomps, beckoning the animals in the mist to comfort him. He hears rumbling, and as he is about to meet his demise, an armored tank appears. The fog gradually clears as a military convoy passes him, carrying survivors and soldiers armed to the teeth. David sinks to his knees, his yells full of agony. The mist clears as soldiers wielding flamethrowers and weapons lay waste to the animals. If they had waited a few seconds longer, they could have all been rescued. So what did you think of this movie? Leave it in the comments below, and if you liked the video, please like and subscribe for more movie recaps. See you in the next video.